And the two of us just kind of looked at each other and like, even though at that point my language skills with Malay were not very, they were not good, and he didn't speak a lot of English either. But we just like looked at each other, and we're like, oh my gosh, like basically like communicating that, with our eyes.
Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah Siegel. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with Alys Granados from Felidae Conservation Fund. Welcome to the show, Alys.
Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you. Tell us about your organization and what's the thing you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I'm wildlife ecologist for the Felidae Conservation Fund, which is a nonprofit organization started in 2006. And our focus is research and conservation of wildcats. So animals here in the Bay Area in California, like pumas, bobcats, and then also around the world, we have projects focused on cheetahs and starting some other work, potentially in Asia, on some other small cats. So currently, a lot of our work, well, my work is focused here in the Bay Area, like I said, in California, and we're focused on trying to ensure the persistence and just the long-term survival of pumas and bobcats here. There's a lot of human disturbances that are affecting them, and so that is, we're thinking that that makes their numbers go down, and so they're facing a lot of threats. So basically, we just want to make sure that they're around for a long time, just because they're really important to the ecosystem.
Tell us about them and what you know, really.
Yeah, we're currently focused on pumas. So they're a large animal. Pumas can't roar, so that's why they're not big cats, even though they're big in size. That's because they lack the apparatus in their throat that doesn't allow them to roar, but they can make other sounds like purring, chirping. And another thing about pumas is that they need a lot of space, and so that's one of the reasons why they're under threat from different kinds of human activities and human disturbances, with a puma needing maybe like 50 square miles, 25 square miles as part of their home range. And you might hear me interchangeably say pumas, mountain lions, cougars, they're all the same animal. And something else that's really cool is that they actually have the Guinness World Record for the most number of names in English. There's also screamer, catamount, and then a ton of other names in Spanish, and kind of local indigenous names.
Interesting. So, what are the main threats from humans?
Yeah, so here well, actually throughout their whole range, it's just there's more and more people in the areas where pumas are. And like I said, because they need a lot of space, with more human activity around, that kind of just like pushes them into smaller and smaller areas. And so what happens is that they end up kind of having to like go through more urban areas, more residential areas, and that puts them under threat. If there's like road development, then of course you can imagine any kind of wild animal trying to cross a road, that's dangerous for them. So that can be a barrier to their movement.
What's their population?
So that's a good question. We don't actually know the numbers. You'd think that an animal as big as that they're not hard to find, you would think, but they are pretty elusive. They're hard to study. I've heard stories of people saying that, they just kind of saw like one scurrying through the forest. They didn't really, hardly even knew it was there. And so they're very silent. And so because of that, yeah, they're just hard to find. They take a lot of space. Finding one in an area of 100 square miles, that can be pretty difficult. But we can assume that their numbers have been declining. Here in California, there was a study that came out, or a report that came out maybe a month ago, that said their numbers are thousands less than what was initially thought like a few years ago. And so even though we don't know the number, we know that they are under threat.
Which states do they live in?
Yeah, so they used to be kind of more spread throughout the US. Now on the East Coast, just in Florida, so the Florida panther, that's a subspecies of the mountain lion. So that's kind of the only place where they are on that side of the country. Here we have them in the western part of the US, so California, and for the most part, and then Oregon as well, Washington. They also occur in Canada, northern Canada, all the way down to the southern tip of South America. And so something else that's cool about them is that they have a super large distribution. So you can imagine, if you think of the map in your head, like all the way from Canada down to South America.
Is there any poaching of them?
Yeah, so there is, here in California, there's not any hunting allowed, but we can assume that there is some instances of people killing them illegally. And yeah, there is poaching in other places.
Why are they poached?
People get mad if one of those animals takes their livestock. And so they might just kill the animal that maybe they think is the one that did it. They might not even be sure. And just that's illegal, of course, because they're not reporting it. Other times they might maybe kill like the mother and take the baby or something. That's some of the work that we do, is trying to educate people and provide resources so that they can take steps to prevent that from happening. Because ultimately what we want is coexistence between wildlife, not just pumas, and people.
Is there a puma pet trade?
Not so much. So you do see them kind of in roadside zoos, though, because the laws with respect to being able to keep cats in captivity until like last year, they were not very strong. And so they are there, but the enforcement isn't really great. So
Can you tell us any stories or what makes pumas interesting? Like, did you get chased by one, almost died, fell off a cliff? What?
no, I can't say that I have, but I can tell you a story about a different cat that I saw. So a lot of my work previously to pumas was in Southeast Asia on the island of Borneo. And so this is like jungle area. One day at like 10 in the morning, I was walking to one of my experimental plots with another researcher, and the two of us were ahead of the group. And all of a sudden in the distance, we just see this animal with another animal in its mouth crossing in front of us. And what it was a clouded leopard, and it was carrying a mouse deer, so a prey maybe like this big, really small little ungulate species. And the two of us just kind of looked at each other, and like, even though at that point my language skills with Malay were not good, and he didn't speak a lot of English either, but we just like looked at each other, we're like, oh my gosh, like basically like communicating that, with our eyes and our expressions to each other, because nobody else saw it, and they almost didn't believe that we saw it, but there was two of us, and so that was like super cool, in the first like kind of wild cat encounter that I'd ever had.
What were you doing in Borneo?
Yeah, so I did my PhD work out there, and we're camera trapping for a whole bunch of different mammal species, basically trying to get an idea of how hunting and logging affects where these animals are. And so that included things like cats, sun bears, an animal called bearded pigs, which ended up being one of the focal species of my work. And then also trying to figure out how logging and hunting affects the plants as well. So it was looking at plants and mammals in Borneo. And then I was there later on studying orangutans as part of a job I was doing. And for that job, we were walking in the jungle at like almost every day, trying to find wild orangutans and taking behavioral data of them on iPads and just writing down everything that they were doing. And that was another conservation project, trying to figure out how they adapt to, the changing forest landscape here. That's kind of forest island, where all around, kind of similar to pumas, there's like more and more development coming up.
Do you know anything about palm oil there?
Yeah, palm oil is a big problem there. Or I shouldn't say a big problem. It's a big industry. And so there's just a lot of it there. As soon as you start kind of getting closer and closer to landing in Borneo, like on the plane, you can see just like kind of monoculture. So fields of the same type of plant there. And it's hard to explain, but it's insane. Like, it's so widespread. And it's a complicated issue because, of course, people are making money off of it. But we know that there's a lot of issues, that a lot of negative effects it can have for wildlife. And so some of the things that some groups are doing, like conservation groups, are just trying to work with those palm oil companies to make sure that, their practices are more wildlife friendly.
So where else have you been?
I've been in Central Africa and Cameroon. That was where I did my master's work, studying human-elephant conflict out there. And so we lived around a national park, moving around to different places, talking to people, just trying to get a sense of what they thought about elephants in the area, how they perceived the trends in elephants there in their populations. And I've been to Uganda and helped out with a project there on giant forest hogs. And I was also in Chile, in Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, so like as far south as you can go before not being on land anymore, before you get to Antarctica. And so that project, we were actually studying beavers down there, which are, unlike in the US, quite destructive there, and an invasive species, or an introduced species that has wreaked a lot of ecological damage down there. So that was an interesting dynamic too, or an interesting way of looking at an animal that here we want whereas over there, people don't want them.
What other cat species can you tell us about?
Yeah, we can tell you about bobcats, which people kind of forget. They're not big cats, they're smaller cats. We call them mesocarnivores. So meso meaning middle, like mid body size, because they're smaller. And sometimes people mistake them quite a bit for pumas, but they're a lot smaller. They've got spots. They've got these little like kind of pointy tufts on their ears. And those are really cool because even though sometimes people think like, oh, there's too many of them, they're pests, they're really good for pest control. So what they do for the ecosystem is they eat a lot of small mammals like rabbits, rodents, and they help keep those populations under control. And so one thing to remember is that all these species have their place, in the ecosystem. And so that's what I think the coolest thing about bobcats are. And they're also trying to navigate these urban environments as well. Affected by similar things as mountain lions. So loss of habitat, loss of connectivity, harder to get to certain places, and then coming into conflict with people as well.
Tell us about your organization. How many people are there? What animals do you work on?
Yeah, so Felidae was started in 2006 with a focus on felines, so wild cats. Initially started on with more like an international focus. So this was when it started before my time. And now it's more focused on the Bay Area in California, focused on pumas, bobcats. But yeah, we still have projects in Tsavo in Kenya, looking at cheetahs, and then starting some work in Asia. How many people we are? There's 3 full-time staff members. So Zara McDonald is the founder and CEO, myself, the wildlife ecologist, and then we have another biologist, and then we have a large team of volunteers, which are really helpful with our field work because a lot of our field work involves setting up camera traps throughout the Bay Area. We have 150 something cameras set up throughout the area. And of course, 3 of us can't maintain that by ourselves. And so, yeah, we have an awesome team of volunteers that maybe each one checks 1 or 2 cameras and uploads the data for us. And that is really good because that allows us to collect data over a large area and also over a long period of time.
Of the species that you study, which are the ones that are most endangered?
Yeah, so right now, pumas, I think, are facing a lot of threats. And so since that's like our focal species with Felidae and the Bay Area Puma Project, that one is like really in danger, especially given that we just had that report come out like a month ago saying that the numbers had declined by a couple thousand. And so even though overall across their range, so from northern Canada to South America, they are listed by the World Conservation Union, so the organization that says how much in danger or not in danger they are. They're listed as least concern, which sounds like, oh, it's not, not a big deal. But actually within all those like different areas, they are under threat. And just as another example, another place where I have a kind of side project in El Salvador, which is the smallest country in Central America. We didn't know that there was pumas coming back until maybe like 10 years ago. They had been hunted out from the area. And so that is a place where I would say they were really under threat just because a lot of the habitat has been lost. But now some of the people I'm working with down there, they've done a lot of good work for reforestation. And so, yeah, trying to switch that situation around to get their numbers up in that area. But yeah, overall, I'd say pumas are facing a lot of threats just as human development continues.
How much do pumas move around?
Yeah, so they take up a lot of space. One male might use like 50 square miles, a female maybe like 20-ish square miles. And so they move around within that area and they come across like other pumas every now and then. So they're solitary, but maybe a male and female might meet up for a few days before courtship and then mating. And then then you have kittens or cubs later. And when a female is with cubs, so when she has her litter, she might use less space than that. So females usually use that 20-ish square miles, but when she has babies with her, you can imagine she can't really move around as much or go as far with them. So she'll use up less space. But yeah, if you think about it, that's a ton of space for one animal to use. And they will have overlapping ranges. So it's not like, within that 50 square miles, there's other ones that don't go in that area. They will overlap, but in general, they're not traveling with other pumas.
Do pumas move regionally?
Here in the Bay Area, we have the mountain lion population called like the Central Coast population. There's a different one in Southern California, and so those won't really meet at all. And so that's one of the problems, though, because we have all this like these road development and human development that are stopping them from moving to different areas. Those populations are getting more and more like, genetically isolated. So that's another reason why we want to restore movement. So within their areas, they can get across to different places and meet other individuals and mate, and all that is good for the population overall.
Do pumas attack humans?
No, so this is something we hear quite a bit. People have maybe some misplaced fear about pumas, but you're more in danger of a number of other things like being bitten by dogs or struck by lightning, falling in a bathtub, all those things. Pumas generally prefer to avoid people, which is why people might not even know that they're near one if they're hiking somewhere. But yeah, for the most part, like humans are not on the menu. There have been very, very few, like the number of attacks on humans are super rare. And in the like isolated incidences, when it does happen, it's usually like a juvenile one that like they don't really know what they're doing and they might try and like jump on someone. But that's super, super rare. In the Bay Area, we've only had, I think, 3 like attacks.
Okay, if I could wave my magic wand that I definitely have in my hand right now, what would you wish for?
Oh, what would I wish for mountain lions? I guess I would wish that people would just have more, that there would be more awareness about these species and how awesome they are and what they contribute to the ecosystem. Because, in order to solve all these problems, I think information is the fundamental tool that we need. And so providing more information to people and just making them aware of all these things, making people understand better how to interact with wildlife, what they mean for the ecosystem, that would be, yeah, my wish.
So, how do zoos get their pumas, and what do you personally think about zoos?
How did it get? So I'll give you an example. In the Bay Area, we have 2 cubs that ended up at the Oakland Zoo last year, and that was because the mom was hit by a car. And so that's one way that they ended up in the zoo. Ideally, those cubs would be in the wild still and with their mother, but because of that highway and the mother getting killed, now she's at the zoo. And so the other ways that those animals might end up at the zoos might be breeding programs within, so already captive pumas having babies, and they send the cubs to different other zoos.
And what do you think about zoos?
Well, I think zoos definitely have a place. They're really important for conservation. That was one of the ways I think a lot of us, like maybe that's the only way we might see a wild animal. And so being able to connect with wildlife in a zoo can be really meaningful. Of course, it has to be, a good zoo. You want one where the animals have enough space and they're well taken care of, and also where the conservation message is getting out. So yeah, zoos are super important to helping educate the public and also contribute a lot of funds to conservation work.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Alys, and thank you for watching. You can help animals by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. I'll see you next time on Nature's Guardians. Bye.